Racist cops arrest black woman. Their faces drop when they learn she's the police chief. Late one humid summer evening, two patrol officers in the small city of Creston pulled over a well-dressed black woman driving an out-of-state sedan. Suspicious from the start, they interrogated her with hostility, making snide remarks and demanding she exit the vehicle. What began as a simple traffic stop escalated into wrongful arrest, handcuffs digging into her wrists, a barrage of insults ringing in her ears. None of them had the slightest clue they had just humiliated their soon-to-be boss, the new chief of police. By the time her identity came to light, their reckless racism would trigger a firestorm of consequences. Below is a dramatic, twist-filled story of injustice, transformation, and karma. All names, departments, and events are part of a fictional narrative. Any resemblance to real persons or places is purely coincidental, except for the mention of Quantico, the real-life FBI training hub in Virginia, used here to add a layer of authenticity to the protagonist's background. A flickering lamp in a cramped living room, a battered copy of the Constitution on the coffee table, and a young girl with wide eyes. These were the earliest memories of Dr. Regina Holloway, who would one day become Police Chief Regina Holloway of Creston. As a child in Chicago's South Side, Regina listened intently to her father, a retired Marine, speak about honor, duty, and the promise of America. He used to tell her that the country might not always keep its promises, but that didn't mean she shouldn't keep hers. From that day on, Regina nurtured an unwavering dream to serve her community, protect the vulnerable, and uphold the law with dignity. When she turned 18, she applied to a local community college's criminal justice program, balancing late-night shifts at a neighborhood diner named Sam's Grill, a Chicago staple that served up legendary burgers. She poured every spare hour into studying. Even as she fought to pay tuition and fend off the exhaustion, her dream never faded. Eventually, Regina transferred to a 4-year university where she excelled academically. She interned with legal aid organizations, spending her free time supporting victims of domestic violence and wrongful eviction. She saw up close how prejudice and systemic issues could crush lives, fueling her resolve to be part of the solution rather than perpetuate the problem. After graduation, Regina applied to the prestigious FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Though initially nervous, Quantico was famous for its grueling training. She thrived. Her time there wasn't always smooth. She faced microaggressions, her capabilities sometimes questioned by colleagues who underestimated her because of her gender and the color of her skin. But she rose above it, gaining respect through sheer merit, discipline, and an indomitable spirit. Upon finishing her FBI training, Regina returned to law enforcement at the local level. Her reason was simple. She believed her real impact lay in community policing. Over the next decade, she rose through the ranks in Chicago's police force, pioneering outreach programs in underprivileged neighborhoods. She gained a reputation for being tough but fair, an officer who placed integrity above personal gain. Her track record in solving complicated homicide cases, plus her empathetic approach to victims, earned her accolades from both colleagues and community leaders. Then, one day, she received a phone call that changed her life. The mayor of Creston, an old friend of her former supervisor, was searching for someone to reform a troubled police department in that small city. Plagued by allegations of corruption, prejudice, and excessive force, Creston needed an outsider with unimpeachable credentials to bring about real change. Regina knew it would be an uphill battle. She'd be a stranger, a woman of color stepping into a department rumored to harbor deep-rooted biases. Still, she accepted without hesitation. If there was one thing she believed, it was that every city deserved a fair and just police force. But nothing could have prepared her for the chaotic day of her arrival, when two racist officers decided she was a threat and placed her in cuffs. All of her father's lessons about honor and all of her carefully nurtured ambition were about to collide with some of the worst prejudices law enforcement could manifest. Little did anyone realize that this chance encounter would shake the foundations of Creston PD and the entire city. Regina's move from the bustling environs of Chicago to Creston was almost jarring. Tucked away in a hilly region, the city boasted scenic overlooks, historic buildings, and a population hovering around 60,000 small by Regina's standards, yet large enough to harbor the complexities of urban life. Its winding roads and tree-lined streets belied the tension simmering just below the surface. The mayor had arranged for Regina to have a private reception at City Hall the following morning, where she'd be introduced as Creston's new chief of police. Since her appointment was a hush-hush affair, until she officially took the oath, only a few top city officials even knew what she looked like. Regina found it odd how her photo hadn't circulated among the rank and file yet, but she assumed that was part of the mayor's strategy to avoid internal sabotage before her arrival. The city needed her incognito presence for a few days. She'd been told enough time to quietly assess the department's culture and see for herself what needed fixing. She arrived late in the afternoon, driving alone in a sedan she'd borrowed from a friend in Chicago. Instead of the standard black SUVs typically arranged for city officials, she wanted something unremarkable. Anonymity gave her the freedom to explore Creston's neighborhoods without fanfare. With the sun dipping below the horizon, Regina steered onto Broad Avenue, a main thoroughfare lined with small businesses, local diners, auto shops, and a few grocery stores. The plan was to check into a modest motel on the outskirts of town. She'd chosen it deliberately, feeling that a boutique hotel near City Hall would make her too conspicuous. As she navigated the unfamiliar streets, she marveled at the quaint vibe. Brightly painted murals decorated the sides of historic brick buildings, giving her a sense of hope that this town might be receptive to change if guided correctly. A conversation with her father echoed in her mind. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice if we push hard enough. She had always believed that. Perhaps Creston was the perfect place to push for something better. Yet, despite her optimism, she sensed an undercurrent of disquiet. Earlier that day, she'd seen the local newspaper, the Creston Ledger, which featured an anonymous editorial blasting outsider hires who didn't understand the town's values. She couldn't help but suspect it was about her. She steeled herself, reminding her heart that her job was to serve, to protect, and to transform. That always came with a price. As she stopped at a red light, the sky fully darkened, and city lights glowed in the reflection of her windshield. She turned onto Oakwood Drive, which looped toward the outskirts. If the mayor wanted her to see the raw, unfiltered Creston before anyone recognized her, she was doing precisely that, driving through it like any other newcomer. Little did she know that just around the next bend, a pair of patrol officers were about to pull her over, setting off a chain of events that would rattle this town to its core and unveil the very injustices. She was sent here to fight. Officers Daniel Kearns and Bradley Novak had been partners for nearly 3 years, patrolling Creston's streets in their cruiser. They both hailed from long-standing local families with ties to the police force. Their fathers had served, their uncles had served, and they often repeated the phrase, "It's in our blood," whenever asked why they joined. Though they'd grown up together, their personalities were as different as day and night. Kearns was brash and aggressive, a man who believed in asserting authority first and asking questions later. He was known for having a quick temper, and the power of the badge only heightened his worst instincts. Novak, on the other hand, was quieter, but no less problematic. He'd nod along with Kearns's questionable remarks and jokes, never offering an overt challenge, but never walking away either. His complicity was as much a part of the problem as Kearns's overt racism. Over the past few years, they'd garnered a reputation for targeting certain neighborhoods, pulling over Black and Latino motorists for minor or even non-existent infractions. Complaints were filed more than once, but the internal affairs system in Creston PD had gained a notorious reputation for burying them. The department lacked strong leadership, especially a chief, who demanded accountability, so these two officers went unchecked. That night, Kearns and Novak were parked outside a 24-hour convenience store, their conversation drifting from trivial gossip to jabs at the new police chief rumored to be coming. They didn't know her name, but they'd heard she was from out of town, possibly black, possibly a woman. Details were scarce, but enough for their prejudice to flare. "Hear about the new boss?" Kearns sneered, staring at the store's flickering neon sign. "Yeah, some fancy big city type," Novak replied. "Probably wants to pull the rug out from under us, push all that form nonsense." Kearns rolled his eyes, as if this department needs changing. "We do just fine around here." Novak nodded, complicit as ever. It was at that moment they noticed Regina's sedan pass by, heading toward the less-traveled outskirts. Kearns immediately straightened. "Never seen that car around here before. Could be suspicious." Novak smirked. "Let's find out." They pulled out, tailing the sedan at a distance. For several blocks, they observed her. Driving her speed was a steady 38 mph in a 40 zone. She signaled at every turn, and she maintained her lane with precision. Nothing about her driving warranted a stop, but Kearns refused to let it go. "Maybe she's got out-of-state plates. We'll say we need to check if she's updated her registration." Novak shrugged, flipping the switch to activate the cruiser's lights. The red and blue glare lit up the night sky. They radioed dispatch, but gave no legitimate reason for the stop, just the typical suspicious vehicle line. If dispatch found it odd, they didn't question it. This was standard operating procedure for Kearns and Novak. As the sedan slowed to a stop on a dimly lit stretch of Oakwood Drive, both officers felt that familiar rush of authority. They had no idea their next move was about to unravel their careers. And they certainly had no clue that the woman in the driver's seat was not just any passerby, but the incoming chief of police, tasked specifically with rooting out the rot in Creston's law enforcement system. Regina took a steadying breath as she saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. She glanced at her speedometer, well under the limit. She mentally reviewed her steps, used turn signals, had no broken taillights. She couldn't see how there was probable cause for a traffic stop, but in her experience, being a black woman behind the wheel could be reason enough for certain officers. Pulling over, she kept her hands visible on the steering wheel, an instinct born of caution and years of training. She was momentarily torn about whether to announce her own law enforcement credentials right away. Part of her wanted to see how these officers conducted themselves without the knowledge of her rank. If the mayor wanted her to assess the department's real culture, perhaps this was an unexpected opportunity, though a dangerous one. She rolled down her window. Officer Kearns approached first, face illuminated by the glare of the cruiser's headlights. His expression was already hard and confrontational. "License and registration," Kearns barked. Regina calmly reached into her purse, retrieving her driver's license and the registration card for the borrowed sedan. She handed them over without a word. She could see Novak hanging back, one hand near his holster, his posture tensed as if expecting a threat. "This isn't your vehicle," Kearns said after glancing at the documents, his voice dripping with suspicion. "I borrowed it from a friend in Chicago," Regina replied, keeping her tone polite but firm. "Chicago, huh?" Kearns repeated, exchanging a knowing look with Novak. Mind stepping out of the vehicle? Regina hesitated, conscious of how quickly these situations could escalate. Officer, is there any specific reason for this request? Kearns's gaze narrowed. I asked you to step out. That's reason enough. Don't make me repeat myself. Regina recognized the sharp edge of intimidation in his voice. She decided to comply to avoid inflaming the encounter. She unbuckled her seatbelt and carefully opened the door. The moment she stood up, Kearns stepped closer, imposing himself. Keep your hands where I can see them, Novak warned from behind. Regina lifted her hands, palms facing forward, a humiliating gesture, but a necessary one. Kearns circled her like a predator. You coming into our town late at night, driving a borrowed car from Chicago, he said, tapping the papers in his hand. Makes me wonder what you're doing here. Regina spoke calmly, carefully. I'm visiting on business. She purposefully left out details. Business? Novak repeated, his skepticism barely concealed. Yes, she said. I have a meeting with city officials in the morning. Kearns let out a short laugh. Meeting with city officials, or maybe looking to make a quick profit. Regina froze at the insinuation. She recognized it as the kind of racially coded jab certain cops used, implying she could be involved in drugs, prostitution, or something similarly nefarious, simply because of her appearance and out-of-state plates. She was about to produce her police credentials, thinking that might de-escalate the situation, when Kearns abruptly grabbed her left wrist. Turn around, he snapped. Spread your legs. Adrenaline shot through Regina. This was a search, but there was no probable cause. Officer, I don't consent to this search. I'm cooperating, but I want to be clear. He twisted her arm behind her back. Stop resisting. I'm not resisting, Regina said through gritted teeth, trying to control the fear and anger pulsing through her. Novak closed in, yanking her other arm. Within seconds, cold metal cuffs bit into her wrists. Everything happened so fast, and with such practiced aggression, that Regina's heart hammered. She was no stranger to arrests. She had conducted many herself, under lawful circumstances. But being on the receiving end of an unjust detention felt surreal and deeply violating. At that moment, she realized there would be no calm discussion here. She was dealing with officers who had already decided she was a criminal based on nothing more than her skin color and an out-of-state registration. The plan to remain undercover, to quietly assess the department, was no longer an option. Now it was about ensuring her own safety and about bringing to light the darker corners of Creston PD. Bound by handcuffs and seething with a mix of anger and disbelief, Regina was guided, nearly shoved, toward the patrol car. Novak opened the back door while Kearns kept his grip on her arm, ensuring she had no room to protest or break free. I haven't done anything illegal, Regina stated firmly, though her voice trembled slightly under the weight of the situation. Despite her training and composure, the reality of being manhandled by two men with badges made her skin crawl. Tell it to the judge, Kearns snapped back. You're under arrest for possible possession of illegal substances, or maybe stolen property. We'll figure out the exact charges at the station. Regina's mind raced. Possible possession, or maybe stolen property. They hadn't found anything, nor did they have any real evidence to suspect a crime. This was a blatant abuse of power. She carefully considered her next step. Revealing her true identity might stop this, but it also might lead to immediate departmental cover-ups. Alternatively, waiting to reveal her status at the station in front of official records and possibly the shift commander could ensure the incident was properly documented. She let out a breath as she slipped into the cramped back seat, the door slamming shut behind her. She could barely see out through the barred window, but she could hear the muffled conversation outside. She's definitely hiding something, Novak said. Yep, Kearns agreed. We'll get it out of her back at the station. Maybe she's part of a ring, or she's some kind of mule. Out-of-state cars, especially from Chicago, always carry trouble. Regina's jaw clenched. If only they knew who she really was and why she was in Creston. Part of her wanted to shout it at them, but a bigger part insisted on waiting on letting them seal their own fate by putting their misconduct on full display. The engine roared to life, and the cruiser sped off toward the station. Regina tried to center herself, going over the events of the stop in her mind. She noted every detail, their tone, their words, the lack of probable cause, the rough handling. These were all major red flags and evidence of the toxic culture she had come here to dismantle. If these two officers felt this emboldened, it meant the rot extended far beyond them alone. They likely felt protected by complacent superiors, allowing them to do as they pleased. The trip took about 10 minutes, winding through Creston's main streets. Regina recognized some of the landmarks she'd passed earlier in the day: a closed-down movie theater, an old brick post office, the large spire of St. John's Church. It was disconcerting to see them go by from the vantage point of a detainee. She inhaled slowly, telling herself, "Keep calm. Let them reveal the full scope of their wrongdoing." The station came into view, a low-slung building with bright floodlights over the parking lot. Regina caught sight of a sign that read Creston Police Department, Protect and Serve, ironically displayed above the entrance. Within minutes, the patrol car entered a gated area behind the building. The door to her right opened, and Novak tugged at her arm, pulling her out. Her wrists still hurt from the too tight cuffs, but she steeled herself. She was about to walk into the heart of the department she was supposed to lead. The images of her father's proud smile and the FBI Academy's graduation ceremony flickered through her mind, offering a strange comfort. So this was how her tenure in Creston began, not with a warm welcome or a formal introduction, but with a humiliating, racially charged arrest at the hands of the very officers she was meant to oversee. The irony would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high. The fluorescent lights inside the station's booking area cast everything in a harsh, unflattering glow. A desk sergeant named Miguel Flores, an older officer nearing retirement, watched with raised eyebrows as Kearns and Novak escorted Regina through the doors. He didn't say anything, but Regina noticed the troubled look in his eyes. Perhaps he sensed something was off. "Got a suspect from out of town," Kearns announced to Flores. "We pulled her over on suspicion of illegal activity." Flores frowned, glancing at Regina's calm but firm demeanor. "Anything found yet?" "Not yet," Novak chimed in, "but we'll search thoroughly. Probably hidden in the car or on her person." Flores pursed his lips, clearly skeptical. Regina surmised that he'd seen enough questionable arrests in his time to know when something didn't smell right. Still, he didn't challenge them openly. Instead, he nodded, gesturing for them to proceed with standard booking. They led Regina to a bench where detainees were seated for processing. Kearns removed the cuffs, but his hand remained on her shoulder. Regina rubbed her sore wrists, her frustration mounting. The entire booking area was largely empty this late, with only a couple of officers milling about. She imagined the day shift supervisors had likely gone home, leaving the station in the hands of mid-level or junior officers. "Your name?" Novak asked as he flipped open a notepad. 1,000 impulses warred within Regina. She thought about being direct, stating, "My name is Regina Holloway, and I'm your new chief of police." But something about the callous way these officers treated people of color made her want to expose them thoroughly. If she simply revealed her rank, they might scramble to hide their biases and shift blame. She wanted this on record, so she took a measured approach. "My name is Regina Holloway," she replied evenly. Novak looked up. Holloway. That name sounds familiar, he shrugged. Date of birth? She provided it, each word deliberate. Novak scribbled away, possibly oblivious to the significance of her name. Kearns stood by, arms crossed, eyes scanning for any sign of defiance. Next came the inventory of her personal belongings, her purse, wallet, phone, keys. Kearns rummaged through them with undisguised disdain. He stiffened when he pulled out a folded paper from the mayor, which contained a brief message welcoming Regina to Creston and confirming her role. It didn't explicitly say police chief, but had the mayor's signature and letterhead. Kearns's brow furrowed. "What's this?" he asked, handing it to Novak. Novak read the letter, confusion twisting his features. The mention of the important leadership position should have raised questions, but apparently not enough. "This doesn't say anything about who you really are," Kearns snapped, though his tone lacked the earlier bluster. "Another piece of evidence, perhaps." He shoved the letter back into her purse. Regina suppressed the urge to roll her eyes. She noted how not once had they read her Miranda rights or asked any genuine questions about probable cause. This was a testament to their routine misconduct, intimidation and humiliation first, procedure later, if at all. As the booking proceeded, she was fingerprinted and photographed. The camera flashed, capturing the mugshot of the woman who should have been commanding this station. Regina wondered if she'd ever see that photo surface in some viral news story, new police chief's mugshot. The thought was simultaneously infuriating and darkly humorous. After the photograph, they moved her to a holding cell. The clang of the metal door resonated through her chest. She sat on the bench inside, arms folded. She still hadn't decided exactly when to pull the rug from under these officers, but the moment was coming soon. The station felt thick with tension, as if even the walls sensed the injustice happening within them. Miguel Flores ambled by, pausing briefly to look at Regina through the cell door. He gave a slight, respectful nod, almost an unspoken apology in his eyes. Regina felt a wave of empathy for the man. He seemed like someone who had witnessed countless abuses of power and had grown weary in a system that rarely held anyone accountable. Regina closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. The hush of the station at night, the distant hum of overhead lights, and the unsettling memory of Kearns's grip on her wrists, these pieces of the night etched themselves into her mind. She promised herself they would serve as evidence in her forthcoming actions. She'd make sure that if Creston were to be reformed, it would start with the likes of Kearns and Novak facing their own misdeeds head-on. Word travels fast in a police station, even after midnight. As Kearns and Novak continued their routine, ensuring Regina was locked away, murmurs began to circulate among a few officers on duty. Someone recognized the last name Holloway from an internal memo that had circulated earlier in the week. It was a low-key announcement from City Hall that mentioned the upcoming arrival of Regina Holloway, the new police chief. At first, the rumors were brushed off as nonsense. Some officers shrugged and insisted it must be a coincidence. Holloway wasn't that uncommon a name, right? But the seeds of doubt had been planted. Officer Flores, after reading the letter from the mayor's office in Regina's purse, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He walked over to Sergeant Deborah Lang, a respected veteran who was finishing paperwork at her desk. "Deb, something's not right about this detainee we just brought in," Flores began quietly. Lang looked up from her computer, her sharp gaze searching his face. "Which one?" Flores lowered his voice further, leaning in. "That woman, Regina Holloway. Kearns and Novak hauled her in for no solid reason. They're claiming suspicion, but not much else. And she's got a letter from the mayor that says she's here for an important leadership role." Lang's eyes widened. "Leadership role as in the new chief?" Flores shrugged uncomfortably. "Could be. I'm not sure. They haven't broadcasted her photo or personal details, but the name and the letter. It's too much to be a coincidence. Lang slammed her laptop shut. Get me the duty roster. We need to see if there's any mention of her. Quick. Flores rummaged in a file drawer, retrieving a binder that contained recent departmental updates. As Lang flipped through the pages, her lips thinned. There it was, buried halfway through. Notice, Chief Regina Holloway, official introduction to Creston PD, scheduled at City Hall. No photo, no date, just a short mention. Lang looked at Flores. Alarmed. If this is the same Regina Holloway, we've got a serious problem. Outside the office, Kearns and Novak chatted with another officer, bragging about having taken a suspicious outsider off the streets. Their laughter echoed through the corridors, a disturbing soundtrack to the injustice unfolding. Lang stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She marched toward the holding cells with Flores on her heels. She found Regina sitting on the cold bench, hands folded in her lap, an air of composed dignity despite the circumstances. Stepping closer to the bars, Lang spoke softly. "Miss Holloway." Regina lifted her head, studying the sergeant's face. "Yes?" Lang swallowed, choosing her words carefully. "I'm Sergeant Deborah Lang. I need to ask, are you the Regina Holloway who's supposed to become our new police chief?" A silent pause stretched. The rawness in the air felt electric. Regina locked eyes with Lang, seeing the flicker of concern and desperation there. Finally, Regina answered, her voice steady. "Yes, I am." Flores let out a soft exhale, and Lang's face paled. She turned to him. "We need to get her out. Now." But it wouldn't be that simple. Kearns and Novak had put her arrest in the system. There was paperwork to reverse, a chain of command to consult, and potential fireworks if these officers realized their massive blunder. Still, the cat was out of the bag. Regina had played along long enough, witnessing the department's raw underbelly. The question now was how deep the corruption ran, and who else would stand with Kearns and Novak. As Lang scrambled to set things right, the clock ticked ominously, and the tension in the station grew. Everyone sensed a storm was about to break, the kind that could permanently alter Creston's police force and expose the vile prejudice that had festered for far too long. The moment the news reached Kearns and Novak, it was as if all the blood drained from their faces. They stood in the dim hallway near the booking desk, each man gripping a styrofoam cup of stale coffee. Sergeant Lang confronted them, accompanied by two other senior officers who had quickly gathered. "Kearns, Novak, I need you both in the briefing room," she said curtly, her eyes flashing with anger she barely concealed. Kearns gave a derisive snort. "We're on duty." "We can't just. This is an order," Lang cut in, her tone leaving no room for argument. Once inside the briefing room, a drab space with mismatched chairs and outdated posters reminding officers of procedural protocols, Lang shut the door. She glared at Kearns and Novak, who shifted uncomfortably. "Do you realize who you've arrested tonight?" Lang's voice trembled with restrained fury. Novak feigned ignorance. "Just some suspicious woman from Chicago." Lang slammed a hand against the wall, making both officers jump. "That woman is Regina Holloway, our incoming chief of police." For a moment, silence pressed in on all sides. Kearns looked at Novak, waiting for him to laugh or claim it was a joke. Instead, Novak stared at the floor, slack-jawed. "No," Kearns finally said, shaking his head. "That can't be. Why would the new chief come into town like that?" Driving a borrowed car, Lang folded her arms, her stare piercing. "That's the mayor's business, not yours. But I just confirmed it with official records. She was scheduled to be introduced to the department tomorrow morning. You two arrested her without probable cause." A flush crept up Kearns's neck. She was acting suspicious. Driving around late at night. Stop, Lang interjected. Just stop. She's in a holding cell right now, an innocent woman, our new chief. You assaulted her, you placed her in cuffs, and you neglected to follow basic protocols like reading her rights. Do you have any idea of the consequences? Both men stood in stunned silence. Outside, more officers milled around, undoubtedly hearing snippets of the confrontation. The station buzzed with tension as the rumor spread like wildfire. Finally, Novak cleared his throat, his voice wavering. What? What do we do now? Lang's nostrils flared. We're releasing her immediately. Then we'll address the fallout. Internal Affairs will be notified, and both of you will likely face severe disciplinary actions. Possibly more. Kern spluttered. But we didn't know. You should have followed proper procedure, Lang snarled. Racial profiling, baseless searches, manhandling a citizen, let alone your boss. I've let too many of your borderline actions slide. That ends now. I won't stand by while you disgrace this badge any longer. She whirled around and marched toward the door. The two officers stared at each other, their eyes haunted. This was worse than their worst nightmares. If she really was the new chief, their careers could be over. Civil lawsuits, criminal charges, everything they once took for granted now hung by a thread. In the corridor, the echo of Sergeant Lang's footsteps seemed to pound like a drum roll for the reckoning to come. Kearns and Novak had no idea how quickly justice would descend upon them, but for the first time, they realized the unstoppable force they'd awakened. They had tried to humiliate a black woman they thought was beneath them, only to discover she was the highest authority they would ever answer to. Sergeant Lang wasted no time. Within minutes, she and Officer Flores hurried to the holding cell where Regina sat. Flores unlocked the heavy door, and Lang stepped inside, a mixture of shame and urgency on her face. "Chief Holloway," Lang said quietly, the title slipping out for the first time in that station. "I'm deeply sorry for what happened tonight. Please know I had no idea who you were until just now." Regina stood, rubbing her wrists still aching from the handcuffs. Though her posture remained calm, anger lingered just beneath the surface. "You're releasing me?" "Yes, ma'am." Lang gestured for Regina to exit the cell. "All charges are being dropped immediately, of course. On behalf of the department, I offer my sincerest apology." Regina looked at Flores, who nodded respectfully, then back at Lang. She stepped into the hallway, head held high. The quiet hush that settled over the small group of onlookers reinforced the gravity of the situation. A wave of realization was washing over the entire building. The new boss had arrived, and her first encounter with the Creston PD was an egregious violation of her rights. "Where are Officers Kearns and Novak?" Regina asked, her voice steady but edged with cold resolve. Lang hesitated. "In the briefing room, Chief." Regina arched an eyebrow. "Let's go see them, shall we?" Lang nodded, and the small entourage headed toward the briefing room. Along the way, a few officers parted like waves, keeping their heads down. Word had spread quickly, and no one wanted to be in the line of fire. Regina still wore the same outfit she had on when she was arrested, simple slacks and a blouse, but at that moment, she radiated an authoritative presence that commanded every step she took. When they reached the room, Kearns and Novak stood awkwardly near the long wooden conference table. Their uniforms suddenly seemed ill-fitting, their bravado replaced by visible fear. Regina entered, her eyes sweeping over them. She took a deliberate breath before speaking. "Officers," she began, her tone controlled, "I understand you arrested me tonight under suspicion of, well, you never quite stated a solid charge. But let's call it what it is. You performed an unlawful stop, escalated the situation, and violated my civil rights." More importantly, you showcased exactly the kind of policing I'm here to change. Kearns opened his mouth, perhaps to offer a half-baked apology or an excuse, but Regina lifted a hand. Spare me. I've seen all I need to see. I don't want an apology out of fear for your own positions. What I want is accountability. Novak managed a hoarse reply. We didn't know you were... That I'm your chief? Regina finished, voice cold. You shouldn't treat anyone the way you treated me, whether they're a private citizen or the head of this department. The weight of her words fell like a hammer. Kearns's knuckles whitened, and Novak looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. As of this moment, Regina continued, you're both on suspension, effective immediately, pending a full investigation by Internal Affairs. When the time is right, we'll see what additional steps need to be taken, criminal charges, departmental penalties, or both. She turned to Lang, who stood by the door. Sergeant, make sure the formal processes are put in motion first thing in the morning, and see to it that my personal belongings are returned. Lang nodded briskly. Yes, Chief. Regina took one final look at the two officers who had so casually tried to strip her dignity. Their pale faces spoke of stunned disbelief, confronted at last with the inevitability of consequences. Regina left them in that room, carrying the full weight of her new authority and a renewed sense of purpose. The same building that had tried to claim her as a suspect would, under her leadership, become a place where accountability and not unchecked prejudice ruled the day. By early morning, the entire city administration knew something dramatic had occurred overnight at the Creston Police Department. The mayor, Robert Hallowell, received a panicked call from Sergeant Lang at 5:30 a.m., detailing the fiasco. Hallowell, a tall, bespectacled man with a penchant for calm leadership, was livid but also deeply worried about the public relations nightmare that was bound to unfold. City Hall had planned a quiet introduction for Chief Regina Holloway, a modest ceremony, a few press photos, and a short question-and-answer session. Instead, they were now scrambling to manage a scandal of epic proportions. The new police chief had been racially profiled and arrested by her own officers on her first night in town. By 7:00 a.m., a small crowd of reporters had gathered outside City Hall, clutching cameras and microphones. Rumors swirled on social media. Some claimed the new chief had been roughed up. Others said she was pressing charges. Regina, for her part, left the station in the early dawn hours, accompanied by Sergeant Lang, who apologized profusely all the way to her new city-provided residence. Regina insisted on driving herself in the borrowed sedan, ignoring Lang's offer of a department vehicle. Once settled at her temporary housing, a modest townhouse near the city centre, Regina took a moment to call her father. She needed his grounding presence. He answered on the second ring, voice still tinged with sleep. "Dad, it's me," she said softly, stepping into a quiet corner of the living room. The shades were drawn, shielding her from prying eyes outside. He listened patiently as she recounted the events. Then, with characteristic pragmatism, he said, "I'm sorry you had to go through that, baby. But you knew change isn't easy. Sometimes, change picks a fight with you before you can even step through the door." Regina closed her eyes, grateful for his steady wisdom. "I know, Dad, and I'm ready for it." After a few more words of encouragement from him, she ended the call feeling more centered. By 9:00 a.m., she arrived at City Hall. The press had swollen to twice its earlier size, forming a gauntlet of photographers outside. A city official escorted her through a side entrance to avoid the crowd. In a small conference room, Regina met with Mayor Hallowell, his chief of staff, and a handful of city council members. "I'm mortified, Chief Holloway," the mayor began, shaking his head. "This is not the impression we wanted to give." Kearns and Novak have been a thorn in this department for years, but we never imagined they'd go this far." Regina regarded him calmly. She could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. "Mr. Mayor, I'm not here to place blame on you personally, but I do expect your support when I clean house. This incident isn't an isolated event, it's a symptom of a deeper problem." A few council members shifted uneasily, recognizing the gravity of her words. The mayor nodded. "You have my full backing. Whatever resources you need for an internal investigation training, policy reforms, just let us know." Regina exhaled a long breath. "I appreciate that, but let's address the media. The public has a right to know what happened, and more importantly, what we plan to do about it." 10 minutes later, they headed to the main rotunda, where a makeshift podium had been set up. Spotlights beamed down on the wooden dais. Reporters crowded forward, jostling for position. The city clerk stepped up first, introducing the mayor. The mayor spoke briefly, acknowledging an unfortunate incident involving newly appointed Chief Holloway. Then, with cameras flashing, Regina walked to the microphone. She surveyed the sea of faces, some curious, some concerned, some already forming judgments. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Sometimes change picks a fight with you. I stand before you today as the new Chief of Police for Creston," she began, her voice projecting with measured clarity. "I also stand before you as a black woman who was unjustly arrested by 2 of my own officers last night. This incident highlights an urgent need for reform, a need that I intend to address starting now." In that moment, the entire city witnessed the beginning of a transformation far bigger than a single arrest. Regina Holloway, bearing the scars of both racism and injustice, was determined to remake the department into something that truly served and protected all citizens. It was a promise she intended to keep, no matter the roadblocks ahead. In the days following Regina's public statement, Creston saw an uproar. Community activists, who had long complained of discriminatory policing, felt vindicated. They marched outside the police station with signs demanding accountability. "No more Kearns and Novaks in Creston PD," read one sign in bold letters. Local news outlets covered the story extensively, while regional and even national channels picked it up for discussions on systemic racism in smaller towns. Inside the department, the atmosphere was tense. Regina assigned Sergeant Lang, who had demonstrated integrity under pressure, to lead a preliminary inquiry. She also requested assistance from the state's Division of Internal Affairs to ensure transparency. The arrival of state investigators in plain suits, carrying thick folders and stony expressions, caused nervous murmurs to ripple through the halls of Creston PD. Kearns and Novak, both on unpaid suspension, had been ordered to stay away from the station pending the investigation, but that didn't stop them from causing noise outside. Kearns, in particular, lashed out, calling local reporters to present his side of the story. He claimed they were just doing their jobs, painting Regina as an opportunist who had set them up to bolster her own reform agenda. Few believed his version, especially since he offered no evidence, and the official logs clearly showed they had no legitimate cause to stop her that night. Meanwhile, Regina held a series of meetings with community leaders, from church pastors to local business owners. She listened as people recounted tales of harassment, intimidation, and racially biased stops that spanned years. Each story chipped away at her composure, but only to reveal a steely resolve underneath. She promised reforms in training, disciplinary processes, and complaint investigations. During one meeting at Clayton Community Center, a 70-year-old black resident named Lillian Martin stood to speak. She clutched a cane with trembling fingers, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "I've lived here all my life," she said, eyes glistening. "Our voices were ignored, our cries dismissed. Now we finally have someone in charge who knows our pain. Don't let us down, Chief Holloway. Regina nodded solemnly. I won't, Miss S. Martin. At the same time, pockets of resistance formed among certain officers who believed Regina was too radical or that she was out to ruin good cops. Fueled by under-the-table gossip and fear of losing their unchallenged authority, they made snide remarks and avoided any direct confrontation with Regina. She was well aware of this faction. Instead of clamping down with authoritarian measures, she quietly directed the newly formed oversight team to review each officer's track record, complaints, use of force reports, traffic stop data. Nothing was off limits. Regina understood that real reform required thorough house cleaning, exposing patterns of misconduct before they escalated into tragedies. Days turned into weeks. The city watched as Regina systematically chipped away at the toxic culture that had allowed racism to thrive. The tension was palpable, but so was the budding sense of hope. It was as if the injustice done to Regina herself had catalyzed a moment of reckoning, a moment Creston could no longer ignore. And Regina, standing at the eye of the storm, carried the badge that demanded respect, even from those who despised the very change she represented. The investigation by the Division of Internal Affairs was swift and thorough. Officers lined up for interviews, each forced to recount their experiences working alongside Kearns and Novak. Many felt the time for silence had passed. Stories surfaced about traffic stops where the duo used slurs, forcibly searched vehicles without warrants, and even took trophies of personal items from detainees. When confronted with official records that contradicted their reports, Kearns and Novak had little defense. Evidence of tampered documentation emerged, video footage from dashcams that had been mysteriously lost or mislabeled, and forms with suspiciously identical language used to justify arrests. In earlier times, they might have destroyed or doctored enough evidence to maintain plausible deniability. But with the entire city's eyes on them and a new chief determined to root out corruption, the net was closing fast. The final blow came when a local man pressed charges for assault dating back 6 months, claiming Kearns had roughed him up in an alley without any cause. The man, a Latino factory worker named George Alvarez, came forward emboldened by Regina's stance. His medical records and a smattering of phone-captured footage from a bystander painted a damning picture. Internal Affairs cross-referenced that complaint with station logs. Lo and behold, there was an entry about a drunk and disorderly suspect who matched Alvarez's description, except the official time and location didn't line up at all. It was a blatant case of false reporting. On a crisp Tuesday afternoon, the district attorney's office announced it was filing criminal charges against both Kearns and Novak, ranging from civil rights violations to filing false police reports and potential assault. The news sent shockwaves through Creston. Some residents cheered openly in the streets, shouting, "Finally, justice!" Others worried about how deep the corruption ran. But Regina stood resolute, releasing a brief statement: "No officer is above the law. Accountability is not a choice. It's our duty." The City Council convened an emergency session to pass new police accountability measures, including mandatory body cams for all officers and a revamped complaint review board with civilian members. Despite pockets of pushback from old guard officers who muttered about political correctness, the shift had begun. Regina's father called her that evening, voice brimming with pride. "Sometimes, baby, the darkest nights lead to the brightest dawns," he said. "I'm proud of you fighting for what's right." Regina smiled, tears threatening to blur her vision. She thought about the 2 men who had humiliated her on her arrival. The memory still stung, but the real victory was dismantling the system that enabled them. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. "I just hope this change lasts." Meanwhile, in their separate residences, Kearns and Novak wrestled with the reality that their days of unchecked power were over. They'd been indicted, suspended without pay, and faced trials that could result in hefty fines or prison time. In a matter of weeks, they went from strutting around like kings of the city to pariahs whose phones wouldn't stop buzzing with reporters seeking comment and angered family members wanting answers. Hard karma had arrived, swift and unrelenting, and the entire department was on notice. The new chief wasn't here to maintain the status quo. She was here to uproot it. In the months following the Kearns-Novak scandal, Creston underwent a metamorphosis. Regina Holloway took her oath of office in a packed auditorium at the Creston Civic Centre, with hundreds of citizens in attendance. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the walls as she promised to serve with integrity, fairness, and compassion. The once insular culture of Creston PD began to change from within. Body cameras became standard issue, and any malfunction or refusal to wear them triggered immediate disciplinary measures. The new Complaint Review Board, composed of local civil rights activists, retired law enforcement from neighboring jurisdictions, and everyday citizens, reviewed incidents with fresh eyes. Officers found themselves held accountable in ways they never imagined. Sergeant Deborah Lang played a crucial role, leading a new internal oversight unit that Regina established. Lang's unwavering ethics and willingness to stand up for what was right made her an ideal partner in implementing reforms. Officer Miguel Flores, nearing retirement, discovered a renewed sense of purpose. He trained younger recruits on the importance of community engagement, urging them to see citizens as people, not threats. During her first 6 months, Regina instituted town hall-style meetings at community centers. In these gatherings, residents expressed their worries, frustrations, and hopes directly to the officers who served them. Regina encouraged her staff to listen, to build trust through transparency. Over time, the tension that once simmered began to ease, though pockets of distrust still existed, shaped by years of neglect. As for Kearns and Novak, their trials drew significant media coverage. The testimonies were damning. Several victims recounted stories of harassment and assault, while evidence of fabricated reports piled up. In a tearful confession, Novak admitted he had been complicit in Kearns's actions, afraid to speak up because he feared backlash within the department. A jury found them guilty of multiple counts, though the exact sentencing would be determined at a later date. Their families left the courtroom in silence, a stark contrast to the triumphant cheers from the people they once oppressed. Meanwhile, Regina found moments of solace in her new home, a modest house near the city park. She embraced small-town life in ways she never expected. She'd grab coffee at the local cafe, chat with the baristas, and occasionally jog through the park's winding paths. Children waved at her as she passed, sometimes shouting, "Hi, Chief Holloway," and she'd wave back with a smile. One night, after a city council meeting, she sat alone in her living room, reflecting on the whirlwind journey of the last several months. The memories of her rough arrival still lingered, metal cuffs biting into her wrists, the venomous glare in Kearns's eyes, and the feeling of utter helplessness. Yet, out of that moment of darkness, a spark had ignited that lit the path for systemic change. Regina closed her eyes and thought of her father's words, of how the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice if one has the strength to push it there. She knew the work was far from over. Prejudice and corruption rarely vanish overnight. But as she looked out the window at Creston's quiet streets, she allowed herself a moment of pride. She had taken the worst kind of welcome a city could offer and transformed it into a rallying cry for accountability, compassion, and genuine progress. And so began a new era for Creston, a place where a police chief, once a victim of her own department's brutality, now led with a commitment to dignity and fairness for all. It was a testament to the power of resilience and the unwavering hope that, given the right leadership, any city, no matter how troubled, could find its way toward justice. Thank you for immersing yourself in this powerful story of injustice, transformation, and resilience. If you were moved by Regina Holloway's journey facing bigotry from the very officers she would eventually lead, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with friends who value stories of social justice, and subscribing to our channel for more impactful narratives. Your engagement helps us shine a spotlight on the courage and tenacity needed to challenge broken systems. Together, we can encourage change where it's most needed and honor the individuals who fight tirelessly for equality and accountability. So don't forget, like, share, and subscribe right now to join us on the mission to tell more eye-opening stories that hold power to inspire real-world reforms. Thank you for watching, and may we all stand up for what's right, no matter the obstacles.